So I'd love any questions you guys have, just bring them up because we got two experts here in the insurance and mortgage world. And storms are a reality. So let's consider Isaias our test run, being ready for whatever else might come our way. So Jason and Brian, please fill our heads with knowledge. No pressure.
This is you, Jason.
Yeah, well, I'm just impressed she knows how to say the, I still don't know how to say it.
Well, we were having fun yesterday. We're like, Isaias.
As many times as you said it, Jessica, yesterday I was reading it on the screen. I'm like, oh, I can't even pronounce that.
It doesn't seem like a real thing. I don't know. It's kind of strange. But yeah, this has been, it's already been a crazy season. It started on June the 1st. So it's been really weird the last couple of days. I'll just say real quickly, it's normally there are some guidelines about when insurance companies start closing or putting what's called binding restrictions in place. Citizens, which is the state company, whenever a tropical storm watch or warning gets issued for any part of Florida, that's the sign that they're going to shut down. And back in the day, even just a couple of years ago, you would see that would be the first domino, and then everybody else would start to follow suit. And that has not been the case this year. We had at least 15 companies place binding restrictions yesterday in place before Citizens did anything. So every company seems to be closing early this year. And we still have a few options, but not that many as of this morning. But it's been a little bit different than what we've seen in the past. Companies are a lot quicker to close down. So at least we know, it's kind of like what Jessica was saying, this is kind of a dry run for us as well to kind of know how companies are going to react this year.
Wow. So that's interesting. So typically in the past, you would have said, okay, you have like a day or two once Citizens starts making some movement to really get rolling. And you'd give us a warning like, okay, guys, if you have anything that hasn't been bound through like when, you know, that you could kind of give us that guide. Now it's not quite that. So we shouldn't rely on that. We should just be aware, right? So as soon as there's a named storm or anything that's looking to be a named storm, if I'm somewhere in the transaction, meaning I've got an accepted offer at least, you know, it's not like I'm just showing property, but I've got an accepted offer and I'm somewhere during the transaction, maybe it's early on and I haven't had inspections or anything yet, or maybe I just had all the inspections and appraisal done. How does this ball up my deal? And for how long? I mean, assuming it's a decent sized storm, how long would that maybe change things or alter things?
Well, for this storm in particular, if it keeps the path that it's on right now, and it just, you know, and it seems to, even overnight, it's ticked a little bit more to the east, and it's fast moving, right? Compared to, I don't remember the storm we had a year or two ago that was going about 1 mile an hour, 2 miles. But as long as it stays over on that side, we're going to be in a situation where it'll go through it, you know, over the weekend, and early next week we'll have companies start opening back up. So, but there's always the possibility, if, you know, the more devastation and the more direct hit that we would have in the state of Florida, the bigger the delay in companies reopening. There'll always be some, well, I won't say always, but there should always be some companies that will open up fairly quickly. But if a company gets hit really, really hard with a lot of clients, you could see delays in them opening back up statewide. And that's the other thing. You've got a lot of companies, they just shut down the whole state of Florida. And then you have a lot of companies that shut down the East Coast or West Coast or these 3 counties. And, you know, we have a company right now that's open in the Panhandle, but nowhere else. So that's kind of the weird thing. They're not regulated on when they can shut down or when they should or shouldn't. So they all do different things. And we just get all the emails. Oh, this company shut down. Now this one shut down. So that's kind of how it works now.
Well, and it's them managing their own risk for their own individual company. So you couldn't have a blanket like everyone must be closed because they all have different risk comfort levels.
Right.
So let's just do a hypothetical. And again, I'm not going to stick you to this because, again, things are changing for you and you're seeing things different than usual. But let's just say this storm did a little bit of damage. And maybe it's just tornado activity or, you know, maybe not real bad activity, but it hit one of the tri-county areas enough to do some damage. How long are we stuck shut down typically? Is that like a day or is it like a week or like 10 days or is it really vary on the damage of the storm?
It's going to vary on the damage of the storm. And for us individually, you know, we have around 40 companies that we write with. Every one of those companies is going to close and reopen whenever they want to. And so there's not a strict guideline on what any of them are going to do. Now, the benefit of us having so many companies is we all, I haven't been in a situation in the last, and I've been doing this 7 or 8 years now. I haven't had a situation where we've been weeks where there's nobody that we could write a policy with. There's always somebody that's reopening. But if we had significant damage, you could see companies stay shut down for a week, 2 weeks, or longer. We just haven't had a situation like that that I've seen in the last 7 or 8 years. Maybe you've been in real estate for longer than that. Maybe you've seen a situation like that, or Brian as well, maybe 10, 15 years ago, maybe something like that. But I haven't seen that.
It like probably have to be like an Andrew to probably have that kind of effect. And let's hope we don't have any of those coming soon. Well, Matt, that is really going into why I want everyone to realize that you represent so many different carriers so that you're able to weave, bob, and adjust and get someone into a different product if they needed to close. And I want you guys to be aware of that at some point when it comes to storms and some of these, wherever you're at in the transaction, you may need to intercept because they may be with this one guy that they got their insurance from for 22 years and he has not the product line that you have or the flexibility. And sometimes when you need to get a deal closed, you just got to figure out who can, right? Just to get it closed. So,
exactly.
So Lois, I think as Lois is on the call, she has she's an awesome pipeline, which we're very proud of her for. And she's got a bunch of stuff popping like in a week and a half or 2 weeks, you know, potentially. And, you know, how could that affect that? Or will it, or should she be worried?
I don't know if she should be worried. I think like the main thing that I'm doing that's a little different this year, and I mentioned this on a call before, is just the importance of getting as much information as possible up front. All the important questions, if I talk to a client, I'm getting the answer to all the important questions that I need so that if I need to bind a policy in the next 20 minutes or 30 minutes, I can do that if I have to, if it's absolutely necessary. So I think as long as, you know, realtors are getting their inspections done as quickly as possible, you know, buyers are selecting quotes as quickly as possible and there's not a delay on that. Cash buyers are not waiting until the very last minute to get insurance, which is a big deal. People are trying to get flood insurance at the very last minute, which is a big issue, especially if they didn't have to have it to begin with, or there was no lender involved. There's going to be a delay. There's going to be a wait, 30 days with the national program. So getting clients' contact information and all that, as long as we have things in advance, as much information as possible, we can get policies in place pretty quickly.
So let's tell the agents kind of what those basic criteria or information things are. So I'm a potential candidate for you. I'm working with Kristen. She's my agent. She's going to connect me. What do you ask me? What do you need? What are the main points?
Well, I never would want a realtor to feel like it's their responsibility.
They're not taking this.
Right.
I should start with that. You're not asking these questions, agents. Jason is, because it'd be
right,
weird for you to ask about credit and all this. It'd be like
yes.
you doing Brian's job and Jason's job, but just so they know what you're gathering. Not
right.
that they're gathering it because it'd be weird if they were.
I mean, the very, very basic up front is going to be contact information, because I do think it's my responsibility to gather all that information. So contact information, the biggest thing that I don't always get up front, I have to know how that buyer is using the property. A lot of times I'll just be sent a name and an address. Even clients just send me their name and address. And they'll give me a lot of information, but they don't tell me, is this your primary residence? Are you going to use this as seasonal? Is this a rental? All of those change the entire policy. So if I have to know how they're using it, that's the big thing, and the address. With just those two pieces of information along with their contact information, I can run quotes and run with it from there. But we're collecting date of births, have to have date of births, have to have their current address. A lot of companies, we do end up needing their socials, but not all companies. But that's, bankruptcies, foreclosures, things like that. We're collecting all that before we bind policies.
Cool. So knowing if it's single, if it's primary residence or not is pretty critical.
Is there anything else? Is there anything else above that you need to bind it? I get that question all the time. What has to happen for someone to bind it? You know, you have their data, but do they have to sign an application?
No, and that's the thing. There's not, there's only a couple of companies that require any signed paperwork ahead of binding a policy. The majority of companies, we can bind a policy, get it in place, and then for many of those companies, the paperwork we get it signed 2 or 3 days after it gets filed in our office. There are some companies that want the application in their office, and we have to send it to the insurance company, but there are very few companies that require any signed paperwork ahead of binding an insurance policy, which saves time.
So literally, I could call you and say, "Hey, I just want to bind this policy," and then you just do a couple things and it's done.
If I have the information I need, yes. Now, if there's a lender involved, I'd love to be able to put the loan.
That darn lender, right?
I have put policies in place where we just needed to get it bound, and I had to go back later because I hadn't gotten a binder request from a lender yet. I don't like to do that if possible, but you know, if the loan's not even put together to where I've been asked to bind the policy, I'd rather not bind it, but I do if, you know, in cases where we just need to get a policy in place, and then I can add the lender information afterwards if I need to.
So anyone have any questions on the binding part or anything storm related? Because I want to then have Brian talk about the mortgage side of things too, and then re-inspections and appraisals, because I think those are worth addressing. Anything else, Jason? So Jason, everyone's asking for your contact info. Not everyone knows that what your contact info is. So first of all, yeah. Jason's on the Clearwater roster, but will you put in the chat your contact info, Jason?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll do it right now.
Awesome. Questions for Jason about the binding process or any situation you might have brewing that you want to ask him about? Okay.
I do. I have a question. So for the flood, Jason, if someone wants to get some flood insurance, what has to happen? Because isn't there a waiting period? So like right now.
That's a great question, because you know what? A lot of people that don't live really on the water that have maybe moved into their house that notice the flooding after a big rainstorm might be like, maybe I should have that flood insurance, right?
Yeah, the main thing to remember about flood insurance is it's a very, very specific definition. It's got to be rising water from outside of the home coming into the home. So, you know, if you've got a leaky roof from a hurricane, got a pipe bust, you know, and the house floods that way, that's part of your home insurance policy. So flood insurance is very specific about water outside flowing into the house that way. But the National Flood Insurance Program has a 30-day delay unless it's part of a loan closing. If it's part of a loan closing, you can start a policy at the same time that you would start the home insurance. But if, you know, I've already been getting calls this week, hey, what do I need to do to get flood insurance in place? Well, they didn't have it in place to begin with. And so now with the national program, there's a 30-day wait. With the private market, you'll see anywhere from a 7 to 12-day wait, depending on the company. But, you know, I had a realtor a few days ago, hey, I need to get some flood insurance on this property before this storm hits. There's no way to even do that. It's going to be for her, it was a 12-day delay. So it's going to start almost 2 weeks after she asked me. So that's the problem with the delay on the flood insurance. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it
does. It answered a question of mine. I didn't know that about flood insurance was water coming in from the outside, rising. I thought it was hurricane roof, you know, came off, soaked the house, you need the flood insurance.
Nope.
That's home insurance.
Okay.
Very cool.
But you know, a lot of, like in our neighborhood, there's a couple areas where, you know, it's a good rain because we had some pretty good rainstorms recently and their yards are flooded. And you think of a big, now here's a question I have for you, surge, because my neighborhood's worried about surge because they were predicting up to 3 foot of surge in our hood. So that would be flood, right? If surge water comes in.
Yeah. If it's rising water from outside, and there's a lot of people just think that there's no chance of them flooding because of where they sit and that sort of thing. But you'll see you know, places, what if the drain gets clogged up from debris in the street, and all of a sudden the street just starts flooding out, and no one's ever seen that happen before. The scary thing is that, you know, the statistics show, and I think about the hurricane in Houston years ago, the one in North Carolina several years ago, that anywhere from 20 to 25% of all the flood claims that were made, or the houses that flooded, were in low-risk flood zones, like an X or an X500. So just because, you know, that's a misnomer in Florida, a lot of people, you hear people say, well, I'm not in a flood zone, or there's really no such thing. If you're in an X flood zone, that just means you're a lower risk. It doesn't mean no risk. And I always try to make sure that people understand that. We write a lot of policies in X flood zones. They're very inexpensive.
Well, that's what I was going to say there. It's really cheaper than a lot of people expect, and they're like, wow, I didn't realize this. And let's be honest, say Denise, you sell me a house, things are great, I don't think I need flood, and all of a sudden after all this rain that we recently had, I see the neighbor's house yards totally flooded, and I'm thinking, maybe I want to rethink that. So food for thought, next June we should put on our calendars to circle back to everyone and say, do you want to shop flood before we're really into hurricane season, because there's a timeline to even qualify or to get it, right?
Unless it's part of a loan transaction, or unless someone's coming up on their current flood policies renewal, then yes, there's always going to be a delay on those. They're called preferred flood policies, but the rates usually run anywhere from a little under $200 to the maximum right now is for $250,000 of dwelling coverage and $100,000 of contents coverage. You get that policy for $516 a year. So that's the maximum you would pay for one of those flood policies as of right now.
That's not so bad for some of these properties that are in low-lying areas that are prone to, like, I just know Holiday in general, there's a whole pocket of Holiday that if there's a good enough flood, I don't drive my car through that area because I've got a low-profile car. I just know I won't be able to for a whole day because it's just, and there's nowhere for the water to go. So something to think about. Stacy Ward has a good question. Is the max for dwelling coverage on flood 250,000?
Preferred flood policies, yes. There are policies that can be written called excess flood policies that can be written on top of flood insurance. So you can have like for the National Flood Insurance Program, for instance, even let's say they're in an AE or moderate risk flood zone, and Brian's requiring it, or lenders are requiring it. Yes, the maximum amount of coverage would be $250,000, but we can write a second excess policy on top of that to cover more of the dwelling than that if needed. The lender wouldn't require that, but we can add that for the client if they want it.
Is there an advantage for private versus the NFIP? Will the private do more than 250?
Yes, the private flood insurance market, many of those companies will go above 250, and you can get more of an accurate amount, closer to what your building coverage is. I hate to even say this, but it's kind of like, you know, I kind of look at it, if a house is concrete block sitting on concrete, the chances of that house washing away are probably pretty small. So a lot of people don't have to have, or at least they don't, I mean, we don't push people to, you've got to, oh, this house is $750,000 worth of replacement cost. You need $750,000 of flood insurance coverage. That's not always the case, but we try to just make sure that they're adequately covered.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've got a little time left, and this is such a great topic, so I'm so grateful for you coming on. Brian, can we shift gears and talk about, okay, we're in the deal, you're our lender, or any lender, it's not that Van Dyke makes you do this, it's every lender's gonna make you re-inspect or reappraise, obviously. So let's just say we're in the deal, Brian's my lender, I'm the buyer, and we've already done the inspection, and we've already done the appraisal, and we're waiting to close, and the storm actually does come. How much damage does the storm have to have, or how much effect does the storm have to have to do a re-inspect?
So the re-inspect becomes required once the area we're in is labeled a FEMA disaster area. Okay, so if it's not been labeled that, then it becomes very subjective to whatever lender wants to do. Okay, but when it's labeled a disaster area, everything stops, and the appraiser has to go back out and at least do a drive-by right? It's like $75, and they go out and they drive by and make sure it's still standing and nothing is crazy wrong with the property.
Okay, so it's not because it's a named storm, it has to actually have damaged the area enough around the property for FEMA to say, we got a problem, Houston.
Correct. Once that happens, all bets are off. And that's the litmus, that's what, as Jeff said, the first domino. There are times that it can be subjective. So I would check with the lender just to make sure they have a comfort level. And the piece of that is, if it is labeled a disaster area, then that's going to slow down, obviously, the appraisal process, which is already slightly delayed. So that's just
well, and that's what we're
mind.
seeing is, if anything, this is going to slow everything down. You may need extensions, and you really need to reach out to your lender to get advice on how long, because it's not some universal timeline, right?
Absolutely not. It's availability for that appraiser to go back on, and that's only if they've already done the appraisal, right? So if they haven't done the appraisal, there's no need to reinspect. They just do the appraisal and do the inspection then.
And obviously, if there was, say the storm was geared to hit on Monday, and you're my lender and we had an appraisal set for Monday, we would just push the appraisal.
Yeah,
reschedule.
Absolutely.
Push her out, right?
Yep,
okay, so just know that could affect you guys, because if you have anything, and God forbid anything happens from the storm, and thankfully it's looking like it's not going to be that big of an impact. But again, this is our dry run, isn't it? This is a little tap on the shoulder saying, hey, should you have told your people about flood insurance 30 days ago? Should you know this? Do you have any deals that you need to talk to anyone? And now you know Jason and Brian who can help you. So anyone have any other questions that they'd like to bring up to these two awesome people? I've learned a lot. I didn't realize I knew it was I kind of knew the flood thing, but I didn't realize it has to be water coming in. I guess I didn't realize that.
Rising water.
Good to know. Thankfully, I'm very insured considering where I live. I'm leaving if there's anything nasty coming, because we haven't got our hurricane windows put on yet. So this house is like Deathville if anything bad happens. So I'll be coming to one of your houses.
And I'll just say, there's questions about the who determines they're in a flood or whatever, what starts it. When we have a property and we have an application, we go out and do what's called a flood certification. We have a service, we hit it, they're in touch with FEMA, and they tell us, yes, it is, yes, it's not, and if so, is it an AE, what designation is it? And that's when we go to Jason and say, okay, here we go. We need a survey, not need a survey, or elevation certificate. That's where it starts, kind of right at application. So you should know kind of at the moment they're signing their disclosures with the lender, whether they are or not in a flood area, because when I disclose the application, I have certain disclosures they have to sign notating they know they're in a flood zone. Okay, so you should know that way at the beginning.
So great job, and I really appreciate you guys coming on, because this is what we needed to hear. Jason, you do such a great job with all of our agents, as do you, Brian. So thank you for being such good partners. And we miss seeing each other in the office, so at least we get to see you on Zoom, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Makes me look good.
I wish we could have like that filter that just made you lose weight.
Skinny. Yeah.
The COVID-20, lose the 20, right? Okay, well, I appreciate you guys. It's Friday. How is it Friday already? So I'll see you Monday morning, and I've got some fun things in store. We'll be using the wheel. Get ready. Have a good weekend, you guys, and be safe.
All right, folks.